if something's not working, you're not getting what you want, don't be afraid to step in, change it, adapt it, put some different cones down, change the space, adapt it so that the players are getting what they need from it as well.
So then my final point that I'd say on that is the tools to adapt, really important. So step and things like that. So and the session plans that are on the England website, they're there, but it's having the bravery to know this is guidance. Hi and welcome to Coaching Cards. I'm Darren, I'm joined by Paul and with Adam. And today we're going to be discussing planning. So going to get straight into it by asking the first question. So the first question is, how important are planning skills for a coach and what would you recommend them to plan for?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of skills that are really important, first and foremost is to have a real understanding of what it is that you want to go after in your session. So in terms of your intended outcomes, the things that you want to support players to get better with, and then, consider the space you've got, consider the time you've got, the players that you've got at your disposal, the area and equipment.
I think you look coaches, they plan, they do it, and then they review. But the review part is the most important bit, and that starts in the planning process. Will this work? Will it won't? How can we plan for maximum activity, and less stage management? You'll see people moving cones all over the place. Lads are on the side saying, wait till I move goals and stuff. It's part of the planning is how do you keep a seamless transition between practices, get that right, so that the ball can roll as often as possible.
It's the concept behind planning and sort of what's the rough aim, what's the direction that we're going to in the session. And like you said, it's being able to manage between what's written on my bit of paper to what's the reality that we're in front of, and understanding that there's a to in and fro in between the two. And then it's, what am I planning? And sometimes, I don't know, especially during my early coaching, I planned so much about the content and what I wanted them to do that I almost forgot a lot of the skills around, okay, where am I? And what equipment have I got? And what are the players doing? And is it at the end of day? And have they had is it first week back at school? Is it something where I've got to go take into consideration those sort of things and not just get so caught up in the finishing?
If you lock yourself into these three questions, like who are the players, what do they need, and how can I help?
Yeah.
That's how your planning is based around. So if you're dealing with under nines, better start with a game, eh?
Yeah.
Actually under 17s you start with a game. And I think sometimes we plan in a certain way where we make our life more difficult. So for example, you've heard this firm, whole part whole and all that. So you start with a game. Never fails.
Hooks
never fails. Start with a game. And then if you're not sure what to do next, you've got time. You've got time to plan it. Also, when you start with a game, kids can come in late, some that arrive late, they can just join in.
I mean, even if it's not a traditional game format, like just that bit of a hook, just something, bit of competition, bit of
direction, goals, bit of scoring, lots of scoring, and competition.
I think that window at the start, like you say, starting with the game, it also gives us a real golden opportunity to coaches to step back and observe and start to use a lens to have a look at what you mentioned earlier. Who have we got in front of us? What do they need to get better and how can I help them? So that little game at the start allows us to really focus in on those observation skills and see some stuff that we can help the players with.
I'm going to go on to the next one because I've just sneakily read ahead, so it kind of leads into what we've been saying there. I know, but that's what coaches do. The question is, why do coaches need to understand their players and allow them to plan effectively? And do you have any top tips for them to do it? So essentially it's, why do they need to understand the players, which goes back to what you were saying before. So if you want to jump off, why is that important and how does that help?
When you're looking at understanding the players, it depends what age they are. You know, like if you're taking under 18s and they're in positions and everything, there's a different lens on that.
Yeah. You
know? And I think that if you're dealing with under 9s, you're dealing with sort of probably more the psychosocial stuff about, are they all right, you know, and they're giving them games to play and then helping them in those games. The more games you play, the more you're going to meet their needs. And what you tend to do, sometimes we do planning practice, and I always ask this question after they do a practice and say, who benefited most from your practice, right? And who benefited least? You're never going to get a practice where everyone gets equal benefit unless it's a game. you're obliged, and quite rightly, is to every kid in that group gets equal access to football. So we get people that are saying, right, those sort of questions for coaches, what you're trying to achieve, how are you going to make the ball roll, how are you going to get as close to the game as possible, and who's going to benefit most? Those sort of questions, rather than the traditional ones of what you're working on, what are the key factors and all that. I think that comes as well, but not at the expense of the other ones.
Players' needs, players' wants. That kind of what you were suggesting there, and I think that's really important for us to understand that our job, our role as the person at the front who's supporting them on their journey is to help them to understand what they need and what's going to help them get on that pathway to where they want to be, but also what their wants are. So are they really trying to develop that non-dominant foot? Is that something that they want and you're going, okay, I'm going to help that. How can you sort your planning to help that happen? But then even to the other side, what I was saying earlier, if you know that they've had a really tough week at school, so you're teaching or you're coaching 15-year-olds who have got a really hectic school day, and then they come into your session and what they want is to disconnect from how busy their life has been. I think it's really important that we go, right, okay, let's take into that, and maybe my planning for my session this week, I'm going to really focus for the first 20 minutes on that social psych stuff, just to help them with a bit of release, as opposed to maybe they're going, oh, we really want to do this technical practice. Maybe we have to go, right, okay, let's be the grown up and help them balance that need and want.
Next one is, how important is it to take a holistic approach, including returns and demands, when planning and setting your intended outcomes?
A holistic approach, it's one of those buzzwords you see it a lot in schools, and you see it a lot in football and in education, and holistic meaning just coaching the whole child, helping the whole child. And I think sometimes we need to just take a step back and go, right, what does this player, what does this person need? And you can really dig into the technical and tactical. But then I kind of think that comes down to the age and stage, like Paul was saying, in that if I've got a 17-year-old in front of me who's really, like, their desire, their real push is to get into the next level, get themselves signed at a pro deal, then maybe I need to really kind of push that. But then if I'm talking to an 11 and a 12-year-old, my biggest thing that I need to do is make sure that they come back next week and, like you said, that they've played football. Yeah. So holistic is really important to consider in everything that we do. So whatever practice that you might take, there is always going to be something psychological or something social, whether it's working with a friend or against someone, and then it's just remembering that all our practices, all our activities, all our drills, all our games, whatever you want to call them, they've got a little bit of everything, and we can shine a light on different areas. So that holistic consideration for me is really important, but it doesn't have to be, today I'm working on this. It could be part of something else.
Yeah, I think as well, like, you can be really skillful in terms of your practice design to bring out other elements to support players. So let's take leadership as an example. It could be as simple as giving a player some ownership to select their team or organise a formation within a small-sided game, or whatever that looks like, and actually then you're supporting the leadership skills, you're supporting the social skills, and that's not necessarily with the football at the feet, but it's a very subtle thing you could have thought about in your planning to specifically choose an individual to help them with something across the four corners that you want to help them with.
And the other thing is if you look at the holistic stuff, like, teamwork is really important.
Yeah.
The social elements of teamwork, and you can have three aside and have teamwork.
Yeah.
You can have teamwork with two. Team is more than one person. It's not 11. So you can have teamwork going on from two aside. If you get a coach to write down and say, right, you're playing a game on a Sunday, tell me what the kids are getting back from that game. You'll get social stuff, psych stuff, physical stuff, mental stuff, emotional stuff, technical, tactical stuff. They'll come back with that. The game offers that.
Yeah. Do you have any advice to help coaches create short, medium or long-term plans for their training?
Yeah, I think the context is really, really important to consider in terms of that, in terms of what age and stage you're supporting and coaching, and then consider around what's age and stage appropriate for their learning and where they're at. It comes back to the stuff we were saying earlier around understanding the players and individuals and what they need, and then putting together a scheme of work, whether it's a couple of weeks where you're focusing on some really specific stuff or whether you're going after something slightly longer term. I think it's just being really clear around what you're going after, making sure that the stuff that you're planning is achievable, that it's measurable so you can support the players and check for understanding and check for learning along the way to make sure they're picking up on the skills and techniques that you're trying to support them with.
You have to prioritise, don't you? You have to say what's important for them to play the game. So manipulating the ball is important. So we better work on that. Yeah, and work on that all the way through. What we tend to do sometimes, we go 11v11 and then stop working on the core skills, the core techniques. So if you look at passing, for example, receiving and passing, I'm not being funny, but you can't play the game unless you receive and pass. It's impossible. So that's a priority. So stick to some very simple things over and over again. You know, and basic principles like the game is about space, time and numbers. You know, are the kids playing in tight areas and big areas? Are the numbers different? Sometimes you're overloaded, sometimes you're underloaded, sometimes you're matched up. Time. Have you got more time, less time? Can you manage time? So those three things is the game. The best players are in control of space, time and numbers. Introduce core moves, wall passes, overlaps, up, back and throughs, and let them combine with each other, and then give them some problem solving exercises, and that could take you all the way through to their 18.
I think a lot of times coaches fall into a trap of they'll get focused on the game or the match day at the weekend and then think here's a list of problems we've got to go and address next week at training without being consistent. And I think, like we were sort of saying earlier, around having that real clarity, practicing the principles and fundamentals of the game and the stuff that are going to really support them longer term, and making sure you're consistent in giving the opportunity to practice those in lots of different ways, under different pressures, under different challenge, and just being really consistent in that and not wavering based on a result or based on something you've necessarily seen at the weekend, and sort of getting off track around what you were planning longer term.
I look 6 weeks in advance. Where do I want these players to be in 6 weeks? What's a real good thing for me? Whether it's in possession, out possession, transition, whether it's a mixture of the two, whether it's about principles of play and things that might, in 6 weeks' time, where do I want them to be? To then go, okay, let's bring that shorter. So how am I going to get there? What are the steps to get to that point? But how does it fit into the bigger picture? So the short term is the right now, the medium's in 5-6 weeks, and the long term is where do I want them to be in a year, in 2 years, 3 years time. So, and it goes back to what do I want, what do they want, what do they need, and how can we get there?
I think the context is really important, isn't it? In terms of if we're in a performance environment where results are really important, we might need to address some stuff we've seen right away. Whereas if we're in foundation phase, youth development phase, and we're working towards something longer term, we can have a bit more of a holistic approach, a bit more of a wider lens on that. Do you have any advice to help coaches create short, medium and long-term plans for a match day?
For me, it builds on what we were saying about training. It's understanding what you're doing, how you're doing it, and then where you want to get to. For me, the most important thing is what you've been working on in training, either the session before, the 2 or 3 sessions before, and how can you actually link it to match day. Biggest reason for that for me is when we talk about planning, there has to be a purpose. So what's the point in doing all that stuff during training for the 2-3 weeks if it doesn't come out on a match day?
If you're working with another coach, if there's 2 of you, and I saw a grassroots team the other day had 2 coaches, well, one could work on attacking and one could work on defending in the same practice. What we tend to do when we plan is go, well, we're all doing this. We're all doing swirly runs in midfield, right? And you say, well, who's defending it? And what you'll get is possession practices, and mostly people, you might have 2 coaches working on possession and go, well, who's doing the defending? Because you're not crash testing the possession. You need someone to look at the defence. So in your planning, if you can, and it's possible, is think about ways in which 2 coaches can co-work together. One could work on the attacking side and the other is up against you working on the defending side. So when it comes to a game, it makes perfect sense.
I think it's a really good point as well, because ultimately the game is random and we can control what we control with practice design or something on a training night, but ultimately when they go out and cross the white line at a weekend, the game's random. So we want players to be adaptable, we want them to be able to problem solve. So I think making sure that you give players as much opportunity as possible in training to solve problems and find solutions, when they then get uncontrolled environments on a match day and they have random things happen to them, they're able to problem solve, they're able to make live decisions in the moment.
What top tips can you give to help coaches plan for a whole season when they don't have much time set aside for planning?
I think for me it's just about being really logical in terms of trying to sector the season into blocks of work. So if we're talking about core skills or we're talking about principles of play, just plan and block some time that you're going to potentially work a couple of weeks in possession, a couple of weeks out, a couple of weeks of transition into out or out to in. And that then gives you a bit of a framework across a 6-week block or an 8-week block or whatever it is to give you your theme, I suppose, and then underpinning that you can pick something you really want to go after and narrow the focus. But as long as you've got a wider framework and a cycle of working, that will really support you in terms of staying consistent across the season and as we've said, making sure that players are getting both sides of the game in terms of that in and out of possession.
I think that's what's interesting, the difference between academies and grassroots, apart from the players which are less obvious, is that grassroots coaches tend to take their teams up one and follow them up. There's a lot of that going on, you take 9s, you go to 10s, you go to 11s, onwards. That enables you to have long-term plans because you know the players. I think it's great. Yeah. You have long-term plans and then you say, well, I know what you can do, I can do it. And I think it's a great, so your season-long things become more than one season because you've got them next year and the year after. And the thing is just say, what do we value? What are the priorities? What do they need to play this game? Yeah, and just keep repeating it over and over again. And you can throw challenges in, but you don't have to you should be able to put a syllabus down for a season on one side of A4 in big font, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
And say, this is what we value and this is what we're going after.
I think both of you have kind of just suggested it there, but for me, it's the simplicity. When I get the question of, not too much time to plan, I think it's possibly because people fall into the trap of over-planning. So 6 weeks down the line, they're going, this is what I'm going to do in that 15 minutes. And it's like, it doesn't need to be that prescribed, that far away. Having an eye on what you want them to do in a year, in 2 years' time, especially if you're lucky enough to go up through an age group, that's having an eye on it is very different to going, this is what I'm going to do in that week. And that's that big picture, simplicity, understanding what's my outcomes, where am I going to, all the way down to what am I doing in this session right now.
Don't be wedded to the outcome. If you're doing a practice and it's going well, why would you stop it and say, right, we've done enough of that, let's move on to this? And you say, no, keep going. We'll keep going. And sometimes, and I'm sure you've done it, you think a practice lasts 20 minutes and you go, oh, no, keep this going.
Especially
if it lasts 45 minutes.
Yeah, if the players are loving it and you're enjoying it.
Exactly. So there is a message about don't be wedded to the outcome. So long-term plans can sometimes, you're driven by these outcomes and you say, well, let's be driven by what the kids are doing. Have a few things that we're going to work on and see where are they loving it? Well, keep going then.
Next one is, when planning for the long term, what do coaches need to consider to help them to decide what they'll be working on across the season?
What's your big picture? Where do you want to be? How do you want to help these players? What, on an individual basis and a team basis, where is, if I said to you right now, in a year's time, you want X to happen, what are we putting in place to make that happen, to encourage that to happen? But then on exactly the same side of it, it's understanding that has to be a plan which is written in pencil rather than written in pen. That would be ideal that we get into that point. That's our objective, that's our outcome. But as we're going through it, other things might shoot off. And a real skill of a top coach is to understand this has happened. I've observed that happening. I've noticed that's happening. And here is an opportunity for me and the players to maybe shoot off to the side a little bit, knowing that full well, I still want to get back to that objective somehow.
You don't have to have a program that is so detailed that you cover everything to do with football. You just cover the key, as we said before, cover the key things over and over again. And the kids will put a different stamp on it every time.
I think we can fall in that trap sometimes as coaches, thinking that every week has to look completely different from the week before. And as you said earlier, if a practice works, use the same practice, but use the step principle to change something. Change a bit of equipment, put an end zone in, change an offside line, it will give you different outcomes, practice a different part of the game. And yeah, if the kids are enjoying it, then there's no harm in repeating stuff and you know, continuing that practice.
What advice do you have to help coaches with planning when working with different areas of the game? Think about things like different ages, different stages, different types of players that we might have. So like your experience in the girls' game might be different to my experience in the boys' academy game. So, yeah.
Fundamentally, it comes down to understanding who's in front of you and what their motivations are. And specifically from my experiences in the female game, it really is just, I guess, at a performance end, it's results focused. But we also still don't want to detract away from the fact that everybody started playing football for the same reason. Everybody's there because they enjoy the game, and when they started at 9 or 12 or however old they've started because it's fun, and we want to make sure we keep it fun and engaging, and we can add learning into that process, and we can make sure that players are learning whilst having fun. But I think engaging sessions that people enjoy taking part in are going to be really, really important regardless of the context as well.
I think it's really important to understand what changes, what stays the same. So like you said, at the end of the day, football for an under 9, goals at each end, 2 teams, halfway line, and that's the same for the Euros final. It's the context in and around it. So I might do a session for an under 10 team talking about invading space and creating space. And my language that I use and sort of the practice and the space that I use for that might be bigger and give more opportunity than if I'm working with the senior first team. But the context changes, but there are some things that stay the same. And if we're looking at the planning side of it, it's about going, look, I don't need to change every single one of these things every single week. The simplicity of the stuff that carries through, has to be there.
The core skills don't change.
Exactly.
They're all the same. It doesn't matter if you're playing in for England or you're playing for ex-Rovers under 9s.
Okay, so last one then to wrap up this discussion. What are your quick fire top tips to help coaches with their planning?
For me, what we've spoken about today is I have an end goal, and that's where I would like to get to. But the simplicity of going, look, let's not overthink that end goal, and that end goal may or may not change, which sounds such a vague answer. But for me, when I'm talking about planning, it's big picture, medium picture, laser focus picture, and it's just being able to flip between the two, take a step back and go, right, where am I, what do I need today in order to try and make that happen? And if it happens, amazing, but if it's not, am I at least making something? Am I making a difference in this period of time?
For me, to reiterate some of the stuff we said, it's just about simplicity and clarity, being really, really clear on a simple message that you want to support the players with, not trying to overcomplicate or do too much in a session. Keep it simple, keep a good sort of focus, keep the focus small, that then allows you from an observational lens to be able to see what you're looking for without having to watch for too many things.
I think for me the planning would be, if you devoted 45 minutes to planning, don't.
No. Yeah.
Put 15 minutes to planning and 30 minutes reviewing. Double the amount you review, because that leads to further plans. And I don't mean that literally 15 minutes, but what I mean is get your balance right. Because actually the key thing is things like, who didn't I hit today? Who didn't get anything out of the practice today? Did it look like football? Was the ball rolling enough? Did we get on the pitch enough? Or did I have to keep moving cones around all over the place? Was the area size too small? Therefore, they got a bit feisty, you know, if they're under 16s, you know what I mean? Or was it too big, blah, 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 that sort of stuff. And you look at those key things and you can put them down yourself. These are the key things I'm looking for in review, and that leads to better planning.
I think there's a piece around the bravery to change it if it's not working as well. I know I mentioned that earlier, but if something's not working, you're not getting what you want, don't be afraid to step in, change it, adapt it, put some different cones down, change the space, adapt it so that the players are getting what they need from it as well.
So then my final point that I'd say on that is the tools to adapt, really important. So step and things like that. So and the session plans that are on on the England website, they're there, but it's having the bravery to know this is guidance, and a plan is really important, but it's also has to be changeable.
You can't. If you spend all your time on stage management, thinking of rules, thinking of constraints in practices, watching whether the practice works or not, you're not coaching. You're managing. So why don't you set up something really simple with a single focus, game-like activity if that's what you're doing, less cones, really simple, on the pitch, get going, eyes on how I can help them.